The night the snow began to fall, Marcus Hale thought the worst thing he would face was another silent dinner at a table set for two when only one chair was ever filled. He had grown used to silence, to the kind of cold that didn't come from winter but from loss. But that evening, as the wind howled through the narrow alley behind his auto repair shop and the city lights blurred through thick curtains of snow, fate placed a small, shivering figure in his path. And within hours, his quiet, wounded world would collide with a terrifying truth he never saw coming. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of doing the right thing even when no one is watching, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that goodness still exists. Subscribe to the channel for more heart-touching stories, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means more than you know. Marcus had closed the shop late that night. Business had been slow, and every extra hour mattered. Since his wife passed away 3 years earlier, he had poured every ounce of himself into raising his 8-year-old son, Jonah, and keeping the small garage afloat. Grief had changed him. It carved lines into his once carefree face and wrapped his heart in layers of quiet caution. He wasn't unkind. He was just tired. Tired of struggling. Tired of pretending he was strong all the time. Tired of wondering if he was enough. He pulled his jacket tighter as he stepped into the alley, heading toward the old sedan he'd been nursing along for years. That was when he saw her. At first, he thought she was just a shadow near the metal trash bin, but then the shadow moved. A little girl, no older than 7, sat curled against the brick wall, snowflakes clinging to her long brown hair. She wore a gray coat too thin for the weather, and clutched her arms around herself as if trying to hold in the warmth that the night kept stealing. Marcus froze. His heart gave a strange, painful lurch. He glanced up and down the alley. It was empty. He approached slowly, kneeling down to her level. Her cheeks were pale, lips trembling, but her blue eyes were wide and strangely calm, the kind of calm that comes after too much fear. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply looked at him as if she had been waiting. There was something haunting in that look. Marcus removed his own scarf and gently wrapped it around her shoulders. His voice softened in a way it rarely did anymore. He asked her name. She hesitated before whispering, "Aurelia." It was a name that sounded delicate and rare, like it belonged in a world far removed from this narrow alley and the smell of engine oil. She couldn't explain how she got there. She said she had been in a car. She said she had fallen asleep. When she woke up, she was alone. The car was gone. The street was different. Everything was different. Marcus felt a slow burn of anger rising in his chest. What kind of person leaves a child in the freezing cold? He called the police immediately, reporting that he had found a lost girl. They told him officers were overwhelmed due to the snowstorm, but would arrive as soon as possible. It could take time. Time was something Aurelia didn't have in that cold. Without hesitation, Marcus carried her inside the shop, locking the door behind him. He turned on the small space heater in his office and made her sit in the worn leather chair that Jonah usually occupied while doing homework. He gave her hot cocoa from the small kitchenette and wrapped her in an old wool blanket that still smelled faintly of motor oil and peppermint from the holidays. As the warmth returned to her cheeks, Aurelia began to look less like a ghost and more like a child. She glanced around the shop with curiosity. Marcus noticed how carefully she observed everything. The framed photo of Jonah on the desk, the faded calendar, the tiny Christmas lights still hanging by the window. When he showed her the photo, she studied it and gave a small smile. She said Jonah looked kind. Something in Marcus's chest tightened. He called his neighbor to ask if she could stay with Jonah for a little longer. He didn't want his son worrying. He told her he had found a child and was waiting for the authorities. Hours passed. The snow fell harder. Aurelia grew quieter. She asked if her mother would be angry. Marcus frowned. Angry. Why would her mother be angry that she had been lost? Aurelia looked down at her hands and said her mother was always busy. always surrounded by people in suits, always talking about security and danger and enemies. Marcus assumed it was the imagination of a child raised on dramatic stories. Then the black SUVs arrived. The sound of engines filled the alley. Headlights flooded the frosted windows of the shop. Marcus stood instinctively, positioning himself slightly in front of Aurelia. The door burst open before he could reach it. Men in dark coats stepped inside first, scanning the room with sharp, calculating eyes, and then she entered. Vivienne Laurent. Even Marcus, who barely followed the news, recognized her face. The billionaire tech magnate, the woman who had built a global cybersecurity empire from nothing, the woman whose name appeared in headlines weekly, acquisitions, lawsuits, political clashes, powerful, untouchable. And now she stood in his small, cluttered auto shop, snow melting on her tailored coat, eyes locked on the little girl wrapped in his blanket. "Aurelia," she breathed, rushing forward. The reunion was fierce and immediate. Aurelia ran into her mother's arms, and for a brief moment all the tension in the room dissolved into something raw and human. But Marcus noticed something else. Fear. Not just relief. Not just gratitude. Fear. Vivian turned to Marcus, her expression composed, but her voice trembling beneath the surface. She thanked him. She asked if Aurelia had said anything unusual, if anyone had followed him, if he had noticed suspicious vehicles. Marcus felt confusion creeping in. That was when Vivian revealed the truth. Aurelia hadn't been accidentally lost. She had been taken. Kidnapped from outside her private academy that afternoon. The driver unconscious. Security breached. The kidnappers had demanded access to Vivian's encrypted financial servers, billions in digital assets, in exchange for her daughter's safe return. Vivian had refused. She had refused because if she gave them access, it would not only cost her fortune, but potentially destabilize financial systems worldwide. Her company safeguarded global infrastructure, hospitals, governments, defense networks. She believed she could outmaneuver them, but the kidnappers changed tactics. They abandoned Aurelia, deliberately, knowing that she would eventually be found, knowing that anyone who helped her could now become a target. Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. Vivian's eyes met his with painful honesty. The terrifying truth wasn't just that Aurelia had been kidnapped. It was that by saving her, Marcus may have placed himself and his son directly in danger. The kidnappers had eyes everywhere. They monitored police frequencies. They tracked movements. If they discovered who had intervened, they might retaliate, not for money, but for revenge. Marcus's first instinct was fear, not for himself, for Jonah. He imagined black SUVs not belonging to billionaires. He imagined threats. He imagined losing the only family he had left. Vivian must have seen the storm behind his eyes because she stepped closer and promised protection. Immediate relocation, private security, compensation beyond anything he could imagine. Marcus listened, but his thoughts drifted to Aurelia, who now clung to her mother yet kept glancing back at him as if afraid he might disappear. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a father who had simply done what any decent person should do. And yet the world he had stepped into was one of encrypted secrets and powerful enemies. Police sirens finally echoed in the distance. Statements were taken. Security teams swept the building. Marcus gave every detail he could remember. The position Aurelia was sitting, her first words, the time he found her. By dawn, the storm had slowed. Vivienne made one final offer. She wanted to repay him properly, not just financially. She offered to fund Jonah's education, to invest in his garage, to ensure Marcus never had to struggle again. Marcus surprised himself with his response. He didn't want wealth. He wanted safety. He wanted a promise that no shadow from her world would ever fall on his son. Vivienne looked at him differently then, not as a struggling mechanic, not as a liability, but as something rare in her world, someone who couldn't be bought. In the weeks that followed, security teams quietly monitored the neighborhood. Investigations intensified. The kidnappers were eventually captured in a coordinated international operation. Their digital trail traced through layers of encryption Vivian herself helped unravel. The threat faded, but something unexpected remained. Vivian began visiting the garage, not with cameras, not with announcements, but privately. Aurelia insisted on seeing Marcus and meeting Jonah. The two children formed a gentle friendship, bonding over homework and hot chocolate in the same small office where snow had once melted from her coat. Marcus found himself talking to Vivian in the quiet evenings after the children played. He saw beyond the headlines, beyond the billionaire armor, to a mother who had nearly lost everything that mattered. She saw in him a man who had lost once and still chose kindness over bitterness. They came from different worlds, one built on code and corporate power, the other on grease-stained hands and long hours. But grief recognized grief. Love recognized love. Months later, Vivian stood once more in the alley where her daughter had been found. This time, there was no snow, only sunlight filtering between buildings. She told Marcus something she had never admitted publicly. The kidnappers had expected her to choose her empire over her child. They believed power always wins over love. She had almost proven them right. Until a single father with nothing to gain chose compassion without hesitation. That choice had forced her to reevaluate everything. She restructured her company, reduced risky contracts, prioritized ethics over expansion, invested quietly in community programs, including a scholarship fund in Marcus's late wife's name, something he had never asked for but accepted with tears in his eyes. Because sometimes gratitude is not about money, it's about honoring what was lost by protecting what remains. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in the power of small acts changing big destinies, and subscribe for more emotional journeys like this one. And before we reach the end, I want to ask you something special. Comment the word kindness below if you believe one simple act can rewrite someone's future. Years later, Marcus would still remember the snowflakes in Aurelia's hair and the way fate had rewritten his life in a single night. He never became wealthy in the way the world defines wealth, but his garage thrived. Jonah grew up knowing that courage doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes it looks like kneeling in the cold beside a frightened child. Vivienne remained powerful, but she was softer, more present. She attended school plays. She walked Aurelia to class. She understood now that security systems can protect data, but only people can protect hearts. And Marcus, the single father who once feared he wasn't enough, realized something profound. He had saved a lost girl, but in doing so, he had also saved himself. Because sometimes the greatest rescue isn't about pulling someone from the cold. It's about rediscovering the warmth you thought you'd lost forever. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even in a world of billionaires and danger, kindness still matters, please engage with this video, share your thoughts, and let us know where you're watching from. Your voice keeps these stories alive. In the end, it wasn't wealth that changed everything. It was one quiet, selfless decision in a snowy alley. A decision that proved love will always be stronger than fear.